My name is Margaret Thompson. I am 74 years old, and every morning I wake up with the same dull ache in my knees. The joints in my hands feel stiff, the kind of stiffness that makes even a teacup feel heavy. I move slowly, but habit carries me forward. I put the kettle on. I wait for the quiet hum of water boiling, and for just a moment, I can almost hear my late husband, Robert, moving through the kitchen the way he always did, humming some tune before heading off to work. That memory is the only warmth that greets me in this house. This place, it doesn't feel like home anymore. It should, but it doesn't. I live here with my daughter Catherine and her husband Daniel. From the outside, it looks like they took me in after Robert passed, like they offered me shelter when I needed it most. That is what people think. But the truth is different. I am not treated as a mother or as family. I am treated like a tenant in my own child's house, as if I am some burden they are forced to carry. Every month, I hand over $2,000 for a single room and meals that are more scraps than comfort. I hear it in Catherine's voice each time she lays out the bills at the kitchen table. She says it loud enough so I will never forget that I am costing her money. Daniel reminds me of the thermostat settings, the lights, the water, as if every flick of a switch, every sip of hot tea, is too much to ask. I carry my bowl back to the sink, careful not to make noise, careful not to leave a mess. But still, I feel their disapproval. I see it in Daniel's stare, in Catherine's sighs. I shrink into my small room at the end of the hall, where most of my things are packed away in boxes, hidden like relics from a life that used to be mine. That is where I sit most nights, wondering when a mother becomes a burden, when a life of sacrifice and love gets reduced to numbers on a bill. I whisper to Robert's photograph before I fall asleep. I tell him I am still holding on, that I have not let the truth slip, because the truth is mine alone. The truth is, this house is not Catherine's. It never has been. After Robert died, I used his life insurance and his savings to buy this house outright. The deed is in my name, but I never told Catherine, or her brother, or anyone else. I knew if they found out, they would strip me of everything. So, I stayed quiet. I let them believe I was surviving on their generosity, when in reality, it was me who gave them a roof. Silence has been my shield. My dignity, though bruised, has been held in place by patience. But lately, I wonder, how much longer can silence keep me safe, and how much of myself will I lose if I never speak? That question would not stay quiet for long. Most mornings move the same way, slow and heavy, as if the air itself is pressing me down. At breakfast, I sit at the edge of the table with my cup of tea, listening to Catherine rattle off numbers as though I am part of her ledger. She names the cost of groceries, the spike in the power bill, the water usage. Daniel joins in from the hallway, pointing out how the house is too warm or too cold, depending on where the thermostat is set. I stay quiet, spooning oatmeal into my mouth, trying not to make noise. Even the soft clink of the spoon against the bowl feels like a crime in that house. When I carry my dish to the sink, I move carefully, hoping not to disturb anyone. My arthritis makes my hands clumsy, but I know the sound of glass tapping against porcelain irritates Catherine. I see her eyes narrow. Daniel clears his throat the way he always does when he wants me to retreat, and so I do. I slip back down the hall to my small room, a space crowded with boxes that hold the fragments of my life photographs, quilts, letters from Robert, small things that once made me feel like someone's mother, someone's wife, someone worth loving. Now, I feel like a boarder paying for space in a home that should have been mine. In the evenings, the walls carry their voices like echoes. I hear them talking about me as if I am not there, as if I am some expense draining their comfort. I pretend not to hear, but every word sinks deep, and yet I stay silent, because silence is safer than confrontation. But not every moment in this house is heavy. There is one person who reminds me that my heart can still feel light. Emily. She is Catherine's daughter, just 20 years old, with a kindness that feels rare in this family. She comes to sit with me on the porch when the air cools in the evenings. She asks me about my childhood, about Robert, about what life felt like before all of this. She laughs at my old stories, the ones about walking to school barefoot or dancing at summer picnics, and her laughter carries me back to a time when joy was easy. Sometimes she sneaks me cookies when her mother isn't looking, whispering that everyone deserves a little sweetness now and then. She listens without judgment, without rushing me, as if my words have weight. With Emily, I feel seen, and when I look at her, I see Robert's smile, the same steady warmth that once kept me steady through all of life's storms. That bond with Emily is the thread that holds me together. Without her, I think I might have broken long ago. Still, most days are heavy. Nights are even worse. I sit in my room with Robert's photograph in my hands, whispering that I am trying to endure, that I am keeping the secret safe, because no one else knows that this house belongs to me. Only I and a man at the bank. The deed is in my name. I bought it years ago with Robert's life insurance and his hidden savings. I let Catherine and Daniel believe they were rescuing me, when in truth, it was my money and my sacrifice that gave them this roof. Why did I keep it hidden? Because I knew what greed could do. I knew the moment they discovered the truth, they would strip me of every ounce of peace I had left. Pretending was easier. Pretending allowed me to survive. But each night, I ask myself the same question. How much more of my dignity can I lose by staying silent, and how long before silence itself becomes the very thing that destroys me? I told myself that survival was about patience, about waiting for the right moment, about knowing when silence stops protecting you and becomes the very weapon you must lay down. That moment was closer than I realized. That night, dinner began in silence, the kind of silence that feels sharp and brittle, like glass about to shatter. I sat at the table with my fork halfway to my mouth, trying to focus on the food instead of the tension pressing down on the room. Then it happened. Catherine announced that household expenses had gone up and that I would need to pay an additional $400 each month. She said it with the flat certainty of someone delivering a business transaction, not a conversation between a daughter and her mother. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression calm but cold, as if he were confirming her words with his silence. For a moment, I thought I had misheard them, but the way their eyes locked on me told me I had heard perfectly. My chest tightened. I reminded myself that I already gave $2,000 every month for a single room, for meals that were hardly more than leftovers. I tried to steady my voice, to remind them that I carried more than my share. But the words fell into a void. Catherine's face hardened. Her tone grew sharper. And suddenly, I wasn't her mother anymore. I was an expense she wanted to cut down. She said I should be grateful. That many people my age ended up in nursing homes. That I was lucky to have a roof at all. I felt those words like stones pressed against my chest. I wanted to remind her of the years I carried her. The nights I stayed up while she cried from fevers. The mornings I ironed her clothes so she could walk into school proud. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The past was invisible to her. All she saw now was a bill. Daniel remained calm, his voice measured but sharp in its own way. He said nothing in life was free. He said it like a lesson, as if I had never worked, never saved, never sacrificed, as if I had not poured my entire life into this family. And then came the moment that changed everything. Catherine slammed her hand against the table so hard the glasses rattled. She told me if I could not pay more, then I should pack my things and leave. Her words echoed in my ears long after she left the room, ringing louder than any slammed door. I sat frozen, staring at the food on my plate, untouched, my hands trembling in my lap. The people who should have been my shelter had become my accusers. The home I had given them was now the place where I was being cast out. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding Robert's photograph. His smile in that picture was the same smile that had carried me through decades of struggle. I remembered his voice telling me long ago that money could buy many things, but dignity was never one of them. I whispered to him that I had tried to be patient, tried to endure, but patience had become a prison. Silence had been my shield. But that night, I realized silence was no longer protecting me. It was destroying me, and something stirred inside me, something sharp and strong that had been buried beneath years of restraint. For the first time in a long time, I felt a shift. I told myself that maybe it was time to turn the tables. Maybe it was time to remind them and remind myself who I really was. The next morning, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out an old address book. Tucked inside was a number I had saved years ago, a local real estate agent named David Harper. My hands shook as I dialed, but my voice did not. I asked if he could meet me privately. When I told him I was not a tenant, but the actual owner of the house, there was a pause on the line. Then his tone shifted to respect. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of silence lifting. I had made my choice. What my daughter and her husband did not know was that their ultimatum had opened a door I had been afraid to walk through. And once I stepped across that threshold, there would be no turning back. Meeting David Harper felt like stepping into another life. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe on River Street, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and the soft patter of rain against the windows. I told him the truth I had hidden from my own children for years. I explained how Robert's life insurance and his savings from decades at the shipyard had been enough to buy the house outright. I explained how I had kept the ownership a secret because I knew what greed could do to a family. David listened, respectful but surprised. He told me the market was strong, that a house like mine in Charleston's historic district could sell for more than $85,000. That number hung in the air like something unreal. I had not spoken figures like that in years. My chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from a strange sense of release. He walked me through the paperwork, his pen scratching across pages that carried the weight of an entire lifetime. When it was my turn, I held the pen steady. My hands trembled, but my gaze did not. Signing those papers felt like stepping out of the shadows. It wasn't revenge I tasted in that moment, it was freedom. That evening, I began to pack. I didn't touch the furniture, didn't fuss with the clutter. Instead, I chose carefully, family photographs, Robert's watch, a few books worn with love, things that held meaning, not things that held weight. As I folded a sweater into my suitcase, Emily walked in. She asked softly if I was leaving. Her eyes were wide, full of worry, and for a moment my heart ached. But I touched her cheek and told her that sometimes doing the hardest thing is the only way to find peace. She nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting me enough to let it be. Days later, the knock at the front door came just after 10 in the morning. Catherine opened it with her usual impatience, only to freeze at the sight of David standing there in his tailored suit, folder in hand. He introduced himself calmly as the realtor managing the property. The confusion on her face twisted into anger when he explained that the house had been sold and that the family had 30 days to vacate. Daniel appeared from the hallway, his jaw tight, his arms folded, demanding answers. Catherine insisted there had to be a mistake, that this was her home, that I was only living there because she had taken me in. Her voice cracked as she tried to cling to that story. But David remained professional, laying out the facts. The deed was valid. The closing date was set. There was no mistake. I was not there in person to watch the storm, but I can imagine it clearly. The raised voices, the panic, the disbelief, and then the silence when the phone on the table lit up with my name. Catherine answered, her voice sharp and shaking, demanding an explanation. I spoke calmly. I told her the truth I had kept locked away for years, that the house had always been mine, that I had bought it after Robert passed, that I let her believe I was a tenant because I knew what would happen if she knew otherwise. I reminded her of the $2,000 she charged me every month for a small room in my own house. I reminded her of the words she had thrown at me, that I was lucky, that I was a burden. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Then her cry broke through, raw and desperate. Daniel muttered curses in the background, and I could hear the sound of pacing, of panic. Emily was there too, I was told later, standing in the corner with her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. I ended the call with one final truth. This was not punishment. It was consequence. Their choices had led here, not mine. And now, each of us would live with the results. For years I had been quiet, waiting. And now, my silence had spoken louder than any words ever could. But what came after would test me in ways I had not expected. After the call ended, I imagined the silence that must have settled over that house. But soon enough, the fallout began. Catherine's voice turned sharp and frantic, carrying through the walls. I knew she was crying, not from sorrow, but from fear of losing control. She shouted that I had betrayed her, that no mother should treat her daughter that way. To her, I had become the villain, the heartless woman who had ruined her life. Daniel's reaction was different. His anger was quieter, colder, calculated. He warned that I would be cut off completely, that if I went through with this decision, there would be no way back into their lives. I could hear in his tone that it wasn't grief, it was a threat. He had always measured everything in terms of power, and he wanted me to feel powerless. But I didn't. Not anymore. Not long after. My son Jerry called. His voice exploded with fury, accusing me of humiliating him, of shaming the family. For years, he had barely checked in. But now, suddenly, my choices mattered to him. I let him rant, listening in silence. And then came the shift. The moment he realized how much the house had sold for. His rage melted into something else, a greedy curiosity. He asked how much I planned to keep. He wondered aloud if I might consider investing in his newest business idea. The swiftness of that change cut me deeper than the anger ever could. In that moment, I realized how transparent it all was. To Catherine, I was a burden. To Daniel, I was a problem. To Jerry, I was a wallet. I told him calmly that my money was mine, that I had spent my life carrying the weight of everyone else's needs, and that I was finished being the well they all drew from. He tried to soften his tone, to turn his demand into charm, but I ended the call before he could twist his words further. My heart ached after that conversation, not because I doubted myself, but because it confirmed what I had feared for years, that love in this family had long been tangled with greed. But not all voices that reached me in those days were filled with anger. Emily came to me, her eyes red with tears. She begged me not to let the bitterness erase what love remained. She told me she couldn't bear to lose both her mother and her grandmother to resentment. Her words broke something inside me, because they weren't demands, and they weren't manipulations. They were pure longing. She just wanted love to survive in whatever way it could. I held her close and promised her that nothing could erase the bond we shared. I told her that she would always have a place in my heart, no matter how fractured the rest of the family became. That night, as she leaned into me, I felt her trembling ease, though the sadness lingered in her eyes. And that's when I made another choice. Out of all of them, only Emily had shown me care without conditions. So I set up a trust in her name, enough to cover her studies in journalism so she could pursue her dreams without debt. Signing those papers was easier than any other decision I had ever made. Because this time, it wasn't about surviving. It was about planting something for her future. The house, the money, the ties I was cutting, they all carried weight. But what mattered most was that one relationship had survived the storm. Emily's presence reminded me that love could exist without strings, and that maybe, just maybe, the next generation could choose differently. The fallout had left scars. The accusations, the curses, the threats, they still rang in my ears. But beneath all that noise, I found clarity. I had not destroyed this family. Their choices had. All I had done was step out of the silence and finally live in the truth. And as I packed the last of my things, preparing to leave that house behind, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. But the true measure of peace wouldn't come until I walked into the new chapter of my life. The day I left that house, I carried only 2 suitcases and a heart full of complicated emotions. The house had been mine all along, yet for years I had felt like a stranger in it. Walking away felt less like loss and more like release. I moved into a modest 1-story home on the edge of Charleston. It wasn't large, but it was mine in every sense of the word. The first evening, I sat in a soft recliner I had bought for my knees. I felt a stillness I hadn't known in years. There was no judgment in the walls, no sighs cutting through the air, no tension pressing on me with every breath. Just silence, and for once, silence was gentle. The mornings felt different too. I opened the curtains wide and let the sunlight pour in. Something Catherine never liked because she said it faded the furniture. I brewed tea and sat at a small table by the window, no longer counting my steps or measuring the sound of a spoon against a bowl. Each moment felt like it belonged to me again. Outside, the yard became my sanctuary. I planted roses along the fence and tucked tomato plants into the soil. My hands ached as I worked, but it was the kind of ache that came with purpose, not shame. Watching the first green shoots push through the earth felt like watching myself come alive again. Every leaf was proof that growth was possible, even after years of being pressed down. In time, I began to walk in the evenings with neighbors. They were small conversations about weather, about the price of groceries, but they were offered with kindness, not calculation. My body wasn't young, but moving it with care made me feel stronger. For the first time in years, I wasn't just existing, I was living, and I kept my promise to Emily. I established the trust so she could pursue her studies in journalism without debt weighing her down. When I told her, her eyes filled with tears, not of expectation, but of gratitude. She said she barely recognized me anymore, that I looked lighter, freer. I told her what she saw wasn't just me, it was peace. Later, as we sat on my porch one evening with sweet tea in our hands, she shared something that stayed with me. She confessed that her mother, Catherine, had grown up feeling invisible, caught between a father who was always working and a brother who demanded attention. She had clung to money as a way to fill the emptiness. Hearing that didn't excuse the cruelty, but it helped me understand. Pain twists people in ways they don't always see. I realized then that the boundaries I had drawn were not walls of punishment. They were fences, allowing compassion to breathe without being crushed. I could hold empathy without letting it devour me. I could love Emily without being consumed by Catherine's bitterness. One evening, as the Georgia sky turned orange and violet, Emily leaned against me and we watched the roses sway in the evening breeze. I told her something I had come to believe with all my heart, that a home is not made of walls or deeds. A home is built on respect, and respect is something no one can rent. My journey had been long, painful, and messy, but in the end, I found freedom not in escaping pain, but in choosing to live beyond it. So let me ask you this: have you ever felt taken for granted by the very people you love the most? What would you have done if you were in my place? If my story touched you, I hope you'll share it. Leave a comment and pass it along. Maybe it will remind someone else that dignity is not a gift others can give or take away. It is something we must claim for ourselves. And at last, sitting on that porch with the cicadas humming and the roses blooming, I knew one thing for certain. I was finally home.